Hello viewers, thanks for watching, and today we will be talking about the Loving v. Virginia case.
In 1967, the landmark civil rights case Loving v. Virginia took place. In this case, a white man and a black woman were put on trial for breaking segregation laws. This led to the court questioning the constitutionality of segregation laws. To give context, we first need to take a look at some of the laws and cases that took place prior to the Loving v. Virginia case. Even though slavery was abolished in 1865, most white Americans still wanted to divide themselves from the African American population. This led to many laws being created to segregate African Americans. The first law we'll look at is the Racial Integrity Act of 1925. The Racial Integrity Act forbids interracial couples from getting married. This law classifies a white person as someone who has no trace whatsoever of any blood other than Caucasian. This means if you're mostly white, but are also part African American, you couldn't marry a white person. Another case that provides context before we talk about Loving v. Virginia was the 1883 case, Hayes v. Alabama. In this case, it was established that if two people of different races lived together or practiced adultery, they would be fined no less than $100 or jailed. This case would later be overturned by Loving v. Virginia. The last set of laws we have to establish are the Jim Crow laws. In 1865, shortly after the abolition of slavery, white people still thought the rights of black people should be limited. Laws such as the Black Codes were implemented to keep black people from having the same rights. In the late 1800s, big cities were known to provide more freedom for the African American population, as they did not implement many Jim Crow laws. This led to a large amount of the African American population moving into large cities. This in turn caused the cities to create many laws to segregate the population. These cases would all lead to the Loving v. Virginia case.
Loving v. Virginia was a landmark civil rights decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in which the court ruled that laws banning interracial marriages violates the Equal Protection and Due Process Clauses of the 14th Amendment. Beginning in 2013, it was cited in the U.S. federal court decisions holding restrictions on same-sex marriages in the United States, including in the 2015 Supreme Court decision. In 1958, two residents of Virginia, Mildred Jeter, a black woman, and Richard Loving, a white man, were married in the District of Columbia. The Lovings returned to Virginia shortly after. The couple was then charged with violating the state's anti-miscegenation statute, which banned interracial marriages. The Lovings were found guilty and were sentenced to a year in jail. The trial judge agreed to suspend the sentence if the Lovings agreed to leave Virginia and not come back for 25 years. On June 12th, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous 9-0 decision in favor of the Lovings that overturned their criminal convictions, struck down Virginia's anti-miscegenation law. The court's opinion was written by Chief Justice Earl Warren. Virginia's officials argued that the state's anti-miscegenation law did not violate the Equal Protection Clause because it equally burdened both whites and non-whites, since the punishment for violating the statute was the same no matter what the offender's race was. A white person who marries a black person receives the same punishment as a black person who's married to a white person. The court accepted this equal burden argument 84 years earlier in its 1883 decision, but in Loving, the court rejected the argument and overruled. The court held that the law violated the Equal Protection Clause because the races of the people involved were the only factors determining whether or not they broke the law.
It's about drive, it's about power. We stay hungry, we devour. Put in the work, put in the hours, and take what's ours.
The Loving v. Virginia case is deemed a landmark case for its effect on future court rulings. By declaring Virginia's anti-miscegenation law unconstitutional, the Supreme Court ended prohibitions on interracial marriage and dealt a major blow to segregation. Despite the court's decision, however, some states were slow to alter their laws. The last state to officially accept the ruling was Alabama, which only removed an anti-miscegenation statute from its state constitution in 2000. The Loving v. Virginia case paved the way for interracial marriages and same-gender marriage from 1967 and beyond. One example is in the Perry v. Schwarzenegger case, where California's Proposition 8 was overturned. The proposition would restrict marriage to opposite-sex couples. In the case, Judge Vaughn R. Walker cited Loving v. Virginia to conclude that the constitutional right to marry protects an individual's choice of marital partner regardless of gender. On narrower grounds, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed. Another case where the Loving v. Virginia case was cited was the Obergefell v. Hodges case in 2015. In this case, the Supreme Court invoked Loving, among other cases, as precedent for its holding that states are required to allow same-sex marriages under both the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. The Obergefell v. Hodges case legalized same-sex marriages across most states. After Loving v. Virginia, the number of interracial marriages continued to increase across the United States and in the South. In Georgia, for instance, the number of interracial marriages increased from 21 in 1967 to 115 in 1970. At the national level, 0.4% of marriages were interracial in 1960, 2% in 1980, 12% in 2013, and 16% in 2015, almost 50 years after Loving. In 2017, exactly 50 years after Loving v. Virginia, more than 1 in 6 newlyweds and 18% of black newlyweds have a spouse of another race. Between 1980 and 2015, the share of white newlyweds who marry outside their race has grown from 4% to 11%. The Loving v. Virginia case led the way for interracial and same-sex marriages, truly making it a landmark case with a huge impact on history. And we'd like to send out a special thank you to these websites for giving us the information for our video.
I'd like to conclude by saying thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We'll see you next time.